Hello and welcome. I am Pastor Diana Edis. I serve at St. Paul's Lutheran Church, Prince Rupert, British Columbia. We gather on the traditional lands of the Tsimshian people. Today, we celebrate Thanksgiving, a civic holiday and not necessarily a liturgical one. But as Christians, we know that every day is an opportunity for giving thanks to God for all of God's wonderful blessings. It just so happens that the rest of Canada will join us tomorrow. As this is a small slice out of liturgical time, we'll be using the Thanksgiving text today rather than the traditional ones for the 19th Sunday after Pentecost. I'll be preaching from the text of Deuteronomy, chapter 8, verses 7 through 18. Hear the promises of God. For the Lord your God is bringing you into a good land, a land with flowing streams, with springs and underground waters welling up in valleys and hills, a land of wheat and barley, of vines and fig trees and pomegranates, a land of olive trees and honey, a land where you may eat bread without scarcity, where you will lack nothing, a land whose stones are iron and from whose hills you may mine copper. You shall eat your fill and bless the Lord your God for the good land that he has given you. Take care that you do not forget the Lord your God by failing to keep his commandments, his ordinances, and his statutes, which I am commanding you today. When you have eaten your fill and have built fine houses and live in them, and when your herds and flocks have multiplied, and your silver and gold is multiplied, and all that you have is multiplied, then do not exalt yourself, forgetting the Lord your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery, who led you through the great and terrible wilderness, an arid wasteland with poisonous snakes and scorpions. He made water flow for you from flint rock and fed you in the wilderness with manna that your ancestors did not know, to humble you and to test you, and in the end to do you good. Do not say to yourself, my power and the might of my own hand have gotten me this wealth. But remember the Lord your God, for it is he who gives you power to get wealth, so that he may confirm his covenant that he swore to your ancestors, as he is doing today. The word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Grace, mercy, and peace to you from God, our loving parent, and our brother, Jesus the Christ. Amen. 3 years ago today, on Thanksgiving Eve, my husband and I crossed the border into Canada. We are American, but now are called to serve in the ELCIC. What an incredible day that was. We had been blessed to worship that morning with the good folks of Plentywood Lutheran Church in Plentywood, Montana, just across the border. Sent on our way, fed and nourished, we had renewed strength for our journey. On that day, 3 years ago, I don't know that I really paid attention to these readings. Our hearts and minds were focused on the border crossing to come, and then the journey to our new home. But as I was reading the text this year, as we prepare to apply for permanent residence, I see the words of the writer as prophetic and hopeful, not just for the Israelites, but for us, for all people. You see, these are the words of Moses to the Hebrew people who had been wandering in the desert for 40 years. They were a people who had been saved from a terrible slavery. In their exodus from Egypt, they had been fed and nourished by the very hand of God through manna from the sky and water from the rock. And still, they forgot whose they were and whom they served, just like we do. This book of Deuteronomy is a retelling, a reminding of all that God had already done for the people of Israel and all that God still had in store for them. It is a wonderful way for us, too, to be reminded that God has come this far with us. Promises have been made to provide for us and to bless us, to walk with us in the good times and the bad. This Thanksgiving, which we proclaim today and tomorrow, is our small thank you to God, who has done and will do great and marvelous things for us. May we be emboldened to not just thank God with our words and our minds, but with our hands and our feet as well. But, you say, how can we thank God with our hands and our feet? Oh, let me count the ways. In verse 6, just before our text starts, Moses tells the Israelites that they can respond faithfully to God by living their faith through the keeping of God's commandments. That means that by honoring God and being faithful to God, by honoring our parents, you remember how it goes, by caring for and respecting one another, and by caring for this wonderful world that God has made, we are living our thanks. But what does that look like in our world today? Maybe you can serve God by being on the church's task force for worship planning in the time of COVID. What better way to show thanks to God and love for God's people than by working to keep them safe during a pandemic? Or maybe you could plan and implement a Zoom social gathering to keep members in touch with one another, and then invite a few friends who have been quarantined or who might live alone. Could you teach a remote Sunday school class? Maybe you could just ask your church leaders where they need help. Or what about serving your neighbor? Maybe you have a few extra minutes and could mow a lawn or rake some leaves for one of your neighbors who hasn't been able to do that. Maybe they have children at home that they're busy schooling. Or offer to go to the grocery store for a neighbor who is at high risk and shouldn't be out and about. Maybe this afternoon and tomorrow and next week, you could use precautions as you go out and do a cleanup walk around your neighborhood. If you have artistic abilities or a wonderful reading voice, could you use those gifts to support your community or your church? Maybe you could begin or join a prayer circle or a phone ministry. There are so many ways to say thank you with our hands and our feet and our voices and our minds by sharing the gifts that God has already given to us. When my husband and I approached the Canadian border that day 3 years ago, we knew that God was calling us to something new, something scary and something exciting. We knew that things would never be the same again. We knew that hands and feet, as well as minds and voices, would be required. But we also knew that this God of ours had brought us this far by faith. This God of ours had plans to use us in new and exciting ways for the good of the community and the good of God's kingdom. And so it is with you. Whether you are new to your community or whether your family has lived on this land for thousands of years, remember the Lord your God. For it is He who gives you power to get wealth, so that He may confirm His covenant that He swore to your ancestors, as He is doing today. Thanks be to God who provides for our needs. And out of that thanks, may we serve the people of God in the world. Amen.